Welcome to the Delingpod with me, James Delingpole. And I know I always say this, but I really am excited about this week's special guest. He has been on my radar for many months, if not several years. I know him from Twitter. His name is Brian of London. Well, that's his Twitter handle. And I think I'm going to love Brian, even though I've only just met him seconds ago, because Brian's from Israel, and I'm in love with Israel, even though I've barely been there at all. And Brian's going to talk to me about important things like why I'm so similar to Doron from Fauda, and it's one of my favorite TV programs, and why I'm probably an honorary Jew. I think I probably am, Brian. Do you think? I mean, look at me.
You've worked
neurotic.
For Breitbart.
Yeah. I'm neurotic. I'm brilliant, obviously, very intelligent. I'm kind of aggressive. I don't take prisoners. No, I'm not suggesting that the IDF don't take prisoners, but you know what I mean. I think I'd probably get on, wouldn't I, if I were to discover a bit like in Daniel Deronda, where the main character discovers suddenly that he's Jewish. I think I'd be a good Jew.
Listen, look, this happens more often than people realize, and especially, in fact, we're going to go off on a tangent right from the start. But Spain,
yeah, we like that.
Spanish Jews. There's all sorts of people in Spain that keep, and actually South America too. There's whole sort of sections of the world that had been Jewish and lost it, and
right.
When they come back to find some sort of Jewish heritage, they feel a kind of comfortableness with it that is hard to explain by all the normal methods.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying you're not, but
yeah, well, I mean, funnily enough, in the last podcast, I had a chat about I like old school Church of England before it went, if there ever was such a time before it went wedge. I mean, I like being part of that as being as part of my heritage. But at the same time, I certainly wouldn't complain if suddenly I found myself eligible to go and live in Israel, as a Jew.
So let me explain. The reason I'm called Brian of London is that I grew up in British public school, London, and went to a Northwest London public school with the whole I've lost my English. What's the thing you do in the morning at school when you all sit there and the headmaster
chapel. Oh, assembly, I suppose.
Assembly. That's the word.
Yeah.
We had chapel too, but I tended not to go to those. But we had assembly every morning. We sang hymns, Onward Christian Soldier. I know the lot of them. I can do them. I do all of them. Jerusalem, obviously. But
absolutely,
that was my upbringing. And until 11 years ago, I lived in London. And then I made what we Jews call Aliyah, which technically means go up. And that's how I come to be in Israel, because I wanted to leave and I wanted to bring up my Jewish kids here because it feels right. There was a double thing. It was a pull for Israel and a push from London. Unfortunately, I didn't feel comfortable there, sort of being Jewish. And I had a sneaking feeling that it was going to get more complicated to be Jewish in England. And it did.
And you're right. Yeah. We can talk about that in a bit. Tell me what were the culture shocks? Because you're in a way my emissary to Israel. You can describe what it's like being an English person, then going out to what would I find weird if I suddenly became Jewish and I discovered that I could go and live in Israel. What would be the really weird things that I would discover?
Well, first off, for me, obviously language is an issue. I married a Jewish woman actually way back, and she came to live with me in England. And we had one child, and we moved here whilst the second was on the way. So I'd been on and off, backwards and forwards to Israel with her family, but I'd never learnt Hebrew properly. So I got here.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I didn't go to the language lessons that I should have done. I went straight into business. So my Hebrew still sucks. I get by, but I can't read and write. I mean, it's a struggle I can read a menu at a restaurant. And so
Yeah.
I'm a PhD educated physicist and I'm functionally illiterate. And
That's frustrating.
It's frustrating. And it does mean that when it comes to like internal Israeli politics, I'm not reading as much as I should. I'm better on the sort of worldview of Israel than I am on the minutiae of what goes on here, because it's not explained in English, and it's not explained anywhere in English. So that's the culture that keeps you.
So I thought the Jerusalem Post would be. Is the Jerusalem Post not?
There's Jerusalem Post, and then there's an English version of Haaretz, and Haaretz is like far hard left. Haaretz is beyond Guardian. The Jerusalem Post, unfortunately, has slid to the left. The Times of Israel was invented a few years back, and that's also gone left. So they're really the only things that are right and in English. There's a thing called a Arutz Sheva, which means Channel 7, which is a website. That's right wing. And then there's real dichotomy. Finding good central stuff here in English is hard. So that's the first culture stuff. But then more than, that's the technical stuff. But there's just, the country is so weirdly not Jewish in the way that most people outside of Israel, the most of the Jews they know are the westernized Ashkenazim, the sort of Europeanized Jews. Right. Israel is a massive mix of Jews from Arab countries, which makes up Jews from Arab countries and from North Africa, and that the Spanish sort of group of Jews fits in with the North Africans. It's this big mix. And then we've got Yemeni Jews, we've got the differences across the Arab world, and then Persian Jews. We came from so many different places to here that the cultures are just massively diverse. The food's diverse. And I find that the psychology is really diverse. So I went into business here with my brother-in-law, he's part Ashkenazi and part Iraqi. His father came from Iraq and his mother came from Poland. Crazy mix like that. Where else in the world do you find Iraqi and Polish? And when you're doing business, there's the Jews who came from the Arab lands have a very different mindset to westernized Jews. And it's just, you only start to understand it when you live amongst it. And then you've got 20% of the population that's actually Muslim Arabs. And then you've got some Christian Arabs. And then you've got Druze. And then you've got on Mount Grishim, which is 10 miles from here, you've got the sort of remains of the Samaritans, real people who call themselves Samaritans today. And they used to live down in Hebron, which used to be called Shechem, but they've moved out of not Hebron, Nablus is the Arab name for it. They've moved out because they don't get on very well with the Arabs. So you've got these, and then we've got Aramaic Christians up in the Galilee, and they're kind of the closest thing you'll get to a Jesus style of living, because they're actually
they have long beards and long hair.
Yeah, there's actually a very famous photograph of me in the office of a guy called Father Nadaf with Tommy Robinson. Yeah. That's why it's famous. And on the wall behind is it? I can't remember who's on the wall. It might be Menachem Begin is on a photograph. So we're in an Aramaic Christian priest's office with Tommy Robinson wearing an IDF t-shirt, me wearing a Mossad t-shirt, standing there. I mean, it's just the craziest, stupidest picture. And the white nationalists throw it at me all the time. But it was just a meeting we had because we were up there. And this thing of driving across the country and meeting all these completely different people, and to think to have someone tell me it's an ethno state or a monoculture it's the most ridiculous thing. I think people outside Israel, they think we're all Woody Allen or Alan Dershowitz living here, and it is just so not like that.
I've got to ask you, Brian, in the area where the Samaritans live, is the suicide rate dramatically lower than in the rest of the country?
I have a feeling they have nothing to do with that. I know. That's every time I hear that name, that's what I think of too. Because
sorry, I couldn't resist. Okay, so it's not full of Woody Allen. So you've kind of disabused me of that particular fantasy. But presumably I'm right on the fact that a lot of the girls in the IDF are just fantastically hot in their khakis.
I'm going to have to plead the fifth. It's yes, let's not talk about, I know. Yeah. Look, but it's the women in general. One of the things, I grew up in London, you know what the weather's like and everything. And one of the things here is that my life is, I'll tell you where I am. I'm just I'm on the very northern edge of Tel Aviv, and I'm about 1.4 kilometers from the Mediterranean Ocean outside this window, which I can't turn the camera around. This window actually has a 1 centimeter thick steel shutter because the room that I'm in is the secure room in my apartment, which is technically a bomb shelter. So
does everyone have one of those? Is that part of the deal?
All buildings, I think, for the last 15 or 20 years have had a bomb shelter in them. Prior to that, there would always be a communal bomb shelter, but they've largely done away with communal bomb shelters. And what they do is when they build this is like a 9-story building, they build the central column of the building where the elevators are, and around there, there's 4 apartments per floor, and there's one room in each apartment that's right in the core of the building, steel, thick door like this with thick steel shutter that I can slide across the window. And it's not, when we know that there are increasing tensions, which has happened sort of 2 significant times since I've been here, then we prepare the room, we make sure it's tidy, we close the steel shutter and leave it closed. And then the alarms go. You've got to, here where we are, if the missiles are coming from Gaza, we've got about 90 seconds to get into this room and shut the door. Down next to Gaza, It's 10 or 7. And that's 90 seconds is plenty. You can find, it's not a very big apartment, I can assure you. You can find all your kids in 90 seconds and get them in here. But I have sat in this room with the door shut, with the shutter closed, with the siren going, and it is a real proper World War II style. Woo, it's nasty. And then I've heard this like, boom, boom, which is the sound of Iron Dome exploding above us. And then you go out and look on your balcony and you can see the trails. I've done that. It's real. It's not a joke.
Yes.
And buildings like mine, there's a famous one, actually, I think, at the end of in 2014, a building very similar in construction to mine was hit in Rishon LeZion, which is just to the south. And it took a direct hit from one of their bigger Grad missiles. And everybody was fine. But the building was a total mess, but people were inside their shelters. Sort of living rooms were just hanging in the air, but the central core remained undamaged.
That's very interesting. So it is real. Okay. And tell me.
Yeah.
How much of Israel is there? Is there kind of countryside that you can retreat to? Is it? Could you go out for a walk and not encounter other people and that kind? Could you get lost?
Well,
you can.
You can very, very easily in basically the country. Without putting a map on the screen, once you get past Jerusalem, a little bit past Jerusalem to the south, and you draw a line, there's a big city called Beersheba, the arrival of the Queen of Sheba. That city, from there all the way down to this tip at the south, which is Eilat, it's just desert. It's empty. It's staggeringly beautiful. And in fact, I used to have a friend who used to live she used to live down there. She's moved in a town in the middle of the desert called Arad. And to go down there with my wife's mall car, which is a big Jeep, and then just drive off into it's fantastic. I love doing that. And there, it's not like, and then also if you go to the north's a bit more crowded, Galilee, and there's the Golan Heights, but you can drive around in the Golan Heights and you can go for walks. But yet you do in the Golan Heights, the one thing is you do every now and then come across a barbed wire marked area, and there's a sign that says landmines. So we haven't completely cleared all the mines everywhere.
Right. But presumably you get checkpoints manned by hot IDF chicks.
You don't get out of the country. Yes. Yeah. I mean,
what are those hats about? Yeah.
Let me tell you something about the checkpoints. Okay. So if I drive from here to Jerusalem, there's two roads.
Yeah.
Okay. One road is the original road. It's called Highway 1, and it kind of goes straight there. And Jerusalem is it's a bit south of Tel Aviv and to the east and up 800 meters. But there's a second road which we've built more recently, and that road technically cuts through the disputed territory. So when you go on that road, you have to go through a checkpoint. So you leave undisputed Israel, you enter disputed Israel, and then when you get to the other side of this little bit in Jerusalem, you pass through another checkpoint. Now, going out, it's unguarded. Nobody looks at you. But when you go back in, you have to slow down, go over a few speed bumps, and a bored soldier looks into your car. Oftentimes it's a woman. And there's actually a psychological reason. We use small women to do this checkpointing point, because it turns out that aggressive young Arab males,
yes,
this doesn't always apply. They don't want to attack the women. But if they see if they're trying to kill themselves, if they see a big guy, they will go for it.
Yes.
But this is something I heard a few years back, and I think it's changed now, because we had a running over incident just 4 weeks ago, where one of these guys committed suicide by, he drove into a young woman.
Yeah.
She was thrown, actually, she was okay. But then one of her colleagues, another woman, just drilled the guy when he got out of the car. I think this is changing, but for a long time that was actually, and it's still one of the reasons that the guards at these places are, oftentimes small women. Strange, but somebody did the work.
And what's that? You still have lots of my hat question, which is a separate question. What is with those hats that your IDF wear?
The really sort of, I think it's camouflage there is a proper Kevlar helmet underneath, but then there's all this other floppy stuff. Is this for the floppy combat units? Yeah. It's just to disguise where the head is. If you're going to be crawling around, you don't know where. It just makes a much larger area, and
interesting.
Area there is a it's confusion and deception.
Right, I see. That's good. What about? I remember a while back. Passing through Israel for some reason. I was on the way to somewhere else, but there was people were quite aggressive, or at least quite rude, quite brusque. I think is that still a characteristic of Israel?
I think when I got here, I think service industries have come a long way. Actually, we had a really bad kind of reputation for service industries, but I think that's definitely improved. And look, the country's growing up all the time. We're so young. My favorite, from England, I remember a story from, I think it was one of the Oxford colleges, from a friend's father. A visitor comes from America and asks the porter, is this building pre-war? And the porter says, this building is pre-America. Well, Israel is so new, yet also
It's post-war.
England. Yeah, it's post every war, but the country itself, the modern nation of Israel, 1948. But you go to Jerusalem and you're walking around on roads that are 4,000, between 3,000 and 4,000 years they've been like that.
Yeah, well, did those feet in ancient times? Well, those definitely walked through.
I mean, I don't know. Like Jerusalem now, one of the things I always tell people to do is the tunnel tour, what's called the tunnel tour. So what you know as the Western Wall or the Kotel is the Western retaining wall of the mound of earth that just holds up the place where we used to have our temple. That's all it is. It's not very important. It's just a wall that holds back a big pile of earth in a place called Mount Moriah. This is something that very few people know. That site where today we have the Golden Dome and not a temple, that's the site of Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is where Abraham was supposed to sacrifice Isaac, and he didn't. In fact, right at the point of the Holy of Holies, where the holiest point of the temple was, is supposedly the spot. And that's exactly where they've stuck this Golden Dome and the mosque to the side. But that wall that you see, the paving that's underneath it, what you can do is you can go through, there's a tunnel that they've excavated, which goes down, and it goes down a heck of a long way, because that you're only seeing the upper third of that wall. The rest is underground. And when you go along that wall, you eventually wind up on paving stones that are Jesus era, minus 2000, zero. And you can do it. You can get there. And I've spoken to so many Christians who come here. When I used to live in England, and I would come here and I would fly back, and I would sit on the plane next to pilgrim tours that were going back to their church in England. I sat next to one, am I allowed to say big black woman? And she was this South London kind of evangelical church.
Yeah.
She spent 4 hours. And I honestly, I didn't mind telling me about every tree was matching the description she read from her Bible. I won't do the accent. That sort of lilting Jamaican.
Yeah.
I could just, it was the most amazing, heartwarming experience to realize she had lived her whole life reading a book. And then she'd come here for 2 weeks and everything had been confirmed.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, contra the current Archbishop of Canterbury, it sounds like she didn't have any problem with the fact that in most iconography, Jesus is white.
Oh, God.
Did you follow that?
Nonsense.
So embarrassing.
What has he said now? I haven't seen the most recent, but he's like,
he's gonna have a look at all. He's gonna look at all the statues, all statuary and effigies and whatever in the church, just to see whether they're contentious and might need removing. And also, he's concerned, about the fact that Jesus has been portrayed as white, when in fact, actually probably he was. I can't remember. It was just really embarrassing. But then, look, I have this notion of Israel being kind of like my dream country, full of people like me, because it believes in free markets and it doesn't go with political correctness. But that's just not true, is it? It's actually quite left.
We've got a horrible mix here going on, because we've got this. There was definitely a whole big socialist thing going on. The whole kibbutz movement. Yeah. And the earliest days of was this left wing. It was massively dominated. And in fact, it's even to call Netanyahu is one of the most free market guys there is, but it's still impossible to say that this thing is a free market here. It's horribly corrupted by unions, and we're having, even with the COVID thing going on, the teachers unions and everything is a mess, and it's interwoven, competing grabs. I mean, Netanyahu did in the 90s manage to sort of he did a sort of an almost Thatcher-esque thing, and things moved here quite dramatically. But I would still say, and I must say, it's easy to start companies. It's relatively easy to hire and fire people here. But we do have a good working health system, which I like. That the health system is actually 3 or 4 competitive, but sort of state supported insurance models. But they're not like profit. You don't see waste. You see them like, I know that they buy secondhand computers and stuff like this. So it's done smartly. It's kind of NHS-y, but then the other thing is you can top up with private healthcare at not ridiculous cost, and there isn't the stigma that England has to that. Sort of, oh my God, he's got Bupa. Again, it's a lot of contradictions. I mean, we're ferociously. Like we've had all of this stuff with the watching our cell phones and contact tracing, and there's been some pushback. Sort of, should we just let the Shin Bet? Okay, the Shin Bet is Fauda. That's the guys in Fauda are working for what's called Shin Bet, which is the internal security services. The Mossad really has no impact on Israel day to day inside.
Is the Mossad external affairs?
The Mossad is external. That's stuff going bang in Iran, maybe, perhaps. Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? It's sort of, oh, look, it's on fire again.
Yeah.
But the Shin Bet, we know what they do here. And they do the Fauda stuff. And they really do that. I mean, I kind of know people who know people. And
so, yeah, Shin Bet is MI5. Mossad is MI6.
Is MI6.
Or the DGS SE. Yeah,
exactly. That's the split. But they apparently can just turn on some button and follow all our phones. I have no idea. I'm really technical. I kind of deeply understand this kind of stuff. I still have, and none of the press has gone into any detail over what they think they can do. Hasn't seemed to help. But there was a little bit of a pushback. People started to call the High Court here. But then again, we've got this High Court here that's very left wing, and they're the ones fighting with Bibi and dragging Bibi through what I consider mostly nonsense. And you know what gets me about it? It's embarrassing because the numbers are so ridiculously small. I mean, we're going to take out like $50,000. Are you kidding me? Come on, come with a proper case.
It's so sad. It's so sad that. Because I have been noticing about how Israel's been responding to the whole coronavirus bollocks, and I have to say you're not really that much better than us, are you? You're still a bit shit. Still a bit overreacting. Yeah. Well, we've now got to wear those stupid bastards. You'd think one of my theories. I have a lot of theories about how sort of force majeure it shapes peoples. So you would think, wouldn't you, or according to my fantastical theory, that Israel, because it deals with life and death on a daily basis, because you could get offed when you could get blown up by a suicide bomber on the bus or whatever, that therefore they would have no time for political correctness or for largely imaginary faux pandemics like coronavirus. And you'd also think, in my dreams, that Israel, like Jewish medics, like real scientists who know their stuff.
No, okay. So I think how we dealt with it to start with, I think, was actually fantastic. We shut our borders really early. We shut down flights from China. Then we quickly, in fact, we had one flight come in from Seoul in South Korea that my friend was supposed to be actually flying back on. That flight landed, half a dozen Israelis got off, and they sent everybody else back to Seoul. I mean, we really...
Yes. Like, it was World War Z.
World War Z. We did that.
See, that was fantastic. I love that scene in World War Z. I loved its understanding of Israel, where Israel keeps out the zombies because it's hardcore. But then, foolishly, Israel makes the mistake. Yeah, that's right. They make the mistake of singing, which attracts the zombies, and also don't they show a certain amount of weakness? And the weakness is where they get punished, and the zombies are over the walls, and that's it.
And that's
There's a lesson there. Don't sing, so don't show mercy.
We were good at the beginning. We've had a very low death rate. And we did come together, and like things like food supply, that the country is sorted for. We can feed ourselves. I mean, if we shut down from the outside, we'd lose a lot of nice to have stuff, but we can functionally feed ourselves properly. We've got all the wheat we need. We've got all of the subsistence stuff that we need to get going. We've got all our own water. Energy wise, we'd be in a bit of a problem long term without oil deliveries. But we've got a lot of gas now. I bet you'd be really shit on sausages, pork, and lobster. I bet you wouldn't have any of those. We've got pork herds, but actually there's a really bizarre ruling, which is you can't allow them to walk on the ground. So any pork farmers, and there are Arab pork farmers, Christian Arab pork farmers, that they keep the pigs off the ground. They have to have wooden slats to walk. Yeah, it's like decking. I look it up honestly, because
so long as I didn't discover I was actually Jewish, well, I could be, I suppose, a non-observant Jew, couldn't I? I could still go on eat
bacon. It's there.
That's good. And do you, Brian? No,
I tend not to. Listen, I like shellfish. I'll eat a lobster when I'm in London, but I don't seek the stuff out here. This is one of the dichotomies between the religious and the non-religious. And then there are some people who are like secular to an extreme, so they'll go out on a Friday night to eat a burger with bacon and cheese on it, to break as many rules in one go. Right. but let's switch this round. So it's like, what makes me Israeli? For me, this is an indigenous identity. Okay, it's what Judaism and being Jewish is it's something that happened here. We had our national genesis on this land. Now, our story has got Egypt in it, and Abraham came from wherever the hell that is. But the genesis of the Jewish story, when Abraham buys a cave to put his wife in, it's in Hebron. It's the first recorded property purchase. I've checked. Try and find me a Greek one. They didn't write it down. The first recorded property transaction in history is buying the cave that has become now the tomb of the patriarchs, where the patriarchs and the matriarchs of the Jewish tribes are buried in Hebron. So to say Hebron is an Arab place is it's the most extreme form of cultural appropriation you can imagine. That's where our story. We made a land purchase. My forefathers, and the deed of that land is written into a book that the whole world calls the Bible. And so that underpins the identity here. And when I say I'm indigenous, I mean Judaism and me with it, the language that we have revived. My friend who's a Canadian First Nation, he's from a tribe called the Métis, which is in northern Canada. And he explained all this to me. He said, Jews and Israel, you're the greatest example of an indigenous people getting their land back. We're the best one ever. Nobody's ever done what we did. In fact, we did it so well that the UN definition of indigenous people had to be subtly tweaked to exclude us. You know how they do that?
Tell me.
So they've got all these rules for what makes you indigenous. Do you have a culture that was born here? Do you speak a language that's got continuity going back? Do you have do you make does everything in your culture matter more when it's in the place where you come from? All of these things are indigenous. But then what they added was, and are you an indigenous people is one who is not powerful in their land, so is a minority.
Oh God!
They added the sort of, you know, this freaking intersectional power dynamic thing. So it's you can be indigenous, basically. You can strive for indigenous power. As soon as you get it, no, you're not indigenous anymore. How brilliant is the US?
I have to say, Brian, looking at you, if you were in Fouda, I don't think you'd be very good at undercover passing as an Arab. No. Okay. This you have to understand. Again, I mean, I'll tell you a story back to 9/11. I know Jews who were in America and were in the UK around 9/11. When 9/11 happened, every security service in the world said, geez, we really need much more Arabic. And I know Jews who put themselves forward who are like the Fouda guy, and they didn't want to touch them. They only wanted Muslim Arabs. And you know, this is the thing you don't get. There's a friend of mine here called Professor Mordechai Kadar. He's famous for one YouTube clip where ages ago, when he was on Al Jazeera, and he was brought up in an Arab village in Israel. He's an older guy, but he's a professor of Arab studies. He can pass as Arab anywhere, and he can do different accents. And he was on Al Jazeera, and that he got into an argument with the host because the host said Jerusalem is mentioned in the Quran. And he pulled out, you know, my friend Kadar, he pulled out the Quran. This is all in Arabic, and said, show me where in the Quran it says Jerusalem, because it doesn't. Jerusalem is not named in the Quran anywhere. Just there's an oblique reference to the furthest mosque. We've got so much of our population. This is going away now to a certain extent, but when they grew up in Arabic households. The Spy, you know, the thing with Sacha Baron Cohen that was on Netflix about, you know, that's how he was able to do that in Syria. But you forget what it is and how much of our population is split between, you know, we've got the million Russians, the descendants of 1 million Russians who arrived here in 10 years. You want to hear an immigration story? This will make your heart. Yes, because between 1989 and 1999, 10 years just after the Berlin Wall, Israel had 1 million Russian Jews. 1 million. We were 4.5 million people, Jews and Arabs, at the beginning of that period. And over the next 10 years, we took in 20% of our population. It's a story of immigration that has never, I mean, you think Merkel was bad taking in 2 million Syrians into what, 70, 80, how many people in Germany, 80 million or something? We were 4.5 million. We went to 5.7 million in 10 years. It's a story of mass immigration and mass absorption that's never, ever been equaled anywhere in the world, ever. Nobody's ever done anything like this. And how did it work? Was it good?
Well, what happened, I mean, the significant effect for me, you know, 20 years down the line is that it's press 1 for Hebrew, press 2 for Arabic, press 3 for Russian, and there's no freaking 4 for English. I mean, that's the difference. And now the kids of those Russians are Israelis and speaking Hebrew, and they're just into the mix. And the difference is they came here to be Jews. We've got an idea what our identity is here. Now, and our identity isn't just religious Orthodox Jews. It's a whole range of religiosity But culturally, we stop for Yom Kippur. That's, again, this is like I lived out all my life as a Jew outside Israel. So I come to live here, and the very first year when Yom Kippur rolls around, which is the day everybody fasts, as a Jew in England, I used to take the day off school and stay home. My kids thought, my friends thought it was a strange Jewish thing, a DOS, he's having a. But what happens when you live in Israel, the whole timetable of the year is built around that. And so when it happens, it's a national event. And Yom Kippur is very special because my kids, for example, would call it the bicycle holiday. Why? I went and checked this. There is actually no law on the statute books, but nobody drives. And when I say nobody drives, I mean it is really dangerous to try and drive. So in religious areas, every Shabbat, from Friday night to Saturday night, it's like this. There are no cars on the roads. But on Yom Kippur, it's everywhere, except the Arabs tend to break this. But even then, you can't drive through my neighborhood in a car on Yom Kippur. You mustn't do it because there are 4-year-olds on bicycles driving right down the middle of every road. My kids, they've got older a bit now, but I've driven on the motorway, 6-lane highway, and we just ride our push bikes there for fun just because you can, because it's the one day a year. And it sort of looks like a post-oil apocalypse Mad Max type thing, because there's no cars. The air pollution, we're not even going to get into global warming, but I'm not a believer in anthropogenic global warming, but I don't like ground level air pollution. Turns out, 3 hours after everybody stops driving and all industry shuts down, we even close the airspace. If you look on, one of these flight radar apps at like 2:00 in the afternoon of Yom Kippur, the planes start doing big diversions. You're not allowed to fly across Israel. And the air gets cleaner. And you can't hear the rumble of the motorway. And it's fantastic. And it's one day a year. It's an amazing experiment. It's a social, and even the non-religious Jews observe this. Now, again, I told you there's no law because we don't have a religious law saying don't drive. It's just stupid to drive. And everybody just organizes their life that one day they're not going to need their car. I mean, you stay home. Some people fast, some people don't. But there is a national observance to it. I mean, it's the same thing that you get in England on Christmas. Christmas feels different and special, but you're losing that unless you. That's what I mean is that. So when we took all these Russians, and even if they weren't observant or whatever, they came here, but they came into a system where they were pretty much forced to learn Hebrew, or at least the next generation had to learn Hebrew. The timetable of the year, the observances, the Passover holiday, all of this stuff means that we have a strong sense of national identity, and we know what we are. And when you bring immigrants into that, and you choose only immigrants who want to assimilate, it doesn't mean we want Yemeni Jews to be like Polish Jews. We don't. In fact, one of the things I'm most sad about is that Yemeni Jews had an indigenous culture in Yemen that goes back way before Islam. Think about it. Jews have been in Yemen for 3,000 years. They've got modes of speaking. They've got Yemeni, like we go to the beach, the lifeguard at the beach he's from a Yemeni family, sort of unbelievably good looking guy with huge hair, fantastic surfer. Yemeni, religious, puts on to fill in. It's a shame that culture, the sort of distinction of Yemeni Jewry, we now have to maintain that in Israel because it's been.
Yes, it's a bit like sort of tigers at the zoo.
You understand, and I would for sure class Yemeni Jewry as an indigenous identity. There's no two ways about it. But it will be. We can't hold on to all of it. It'd be nice if we could. I mean, before Yathrib was a Jewish town before it became Medina. I'm not advocating for the Greater Israel project of taking over the whole Middle East.
No, I think I could sense there might be ructions were that to take place. So I want to say two things. First of all, I want it to be known to you and to God that the fact that I'm doing this podcast with you now is not a substitute for Dick and James go to Israel. That's still going to happen.
And when you do, I'll tell you what, this is the promise I will make to you. Your tour guide will be a woman called Kay Wilson. And she's a qualified registered Israeli tour guide who has the distinction of having been hacked to within a millimeter of her life by two Palestinian terrorists. And she survived. Unfortunately, her friend didn't. Great story. I'll put you in touch with her. She survived and wrote the most amazing book out of the experience and the recovery and the PTSD and all of this stuff.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's that.
And she'll be your guide, and she was our guide actually with Tommy. And you go everywhere. You see where Jesus. You see the fishing boat of. The country is just breathtakingly diverse.
Right.
You gotta come.
No. It's going to happen. I mean, listen. It might even have been this year had it not been for this bloody stupid COVID nonsense. Now, and tell me, Fauda, is it as big in Israel and in Palestine as it is in?
Yeah, apparently it's huge across the Arab world because they got to see how we really do stuff. And it was big here. It was very big here. I had to wait, unfortunately, longer than you because whilst I'm sort of passable with some of the Hebrew, I can't read Hebrew subtitles for the Arabic. And I'm hopeless on Arabic. So I had to wait until Netflix put English on it. And then not only that, Netflix spent another 6 months before they showed it on Netflix Israel. And in fact, what's happened, what's gone out now is that one of the writers has written something called Tehran, Israel, and that apparently is a huge hit. But again, the same problem, that's in Persian, so Farsi. So I've got no chance with that. So I'm going to have to wait for.
What's Tehran about?
That's about the Mossad and whatever's going on in Iran.
Is it? When's that coming out?
Well, it's been shown here, and Apple TV have bought it. So, it'll be shown at some point. But Fauda, when I watch Fauda, one of the interesting things about watching it, when at least you can follow the Hebrew, is like they play some subtle games. So, like, there's a scene. We won't give too many spoilers, but there's a scene where the Bedouin girlfriend of the boxer.
Yes,
she knows now that Doron is an Israeli. So they're standing in the hallway of her school in the Arab town, and he's speaking Arabic to her. She's answering him pointedly in very good Hebrew. And she's doing it deliberately, standing in the hallway of this Arab place. He's speaking Arabic, she's speaking Hebrew, and she's making the point, I know you are a Jew. And she's doing that deliberately because she's a Bedouin, she's an Israeli citizen, but she's an Israeli Arab citizen, and she's in the Palestinian Authority areas. Now, the sign, if I want to travel to Hebron or Ramallah, there's a big red sign, and it says entry to this area is prohibited for Israeli citizens. But the sign doesn't really mean that. It means Israeli Jewish citizens, because Israeli Arabs can go in there, no trouble. But if I were to go in there, basically the sign says it's illegal for me to enter because nobody wants the hassle of rescuing me later, if I get into some trouble. Now, I have been in a couple of times to some areas that I'm not supposed to go with the right guides and so on. But I'm taking risk, and that's all those areas where Doron is, when he's living in amongst them. It's risky stuff just for, I've done business with Arabs in Nablus. Nablus is in the northern part of Judea, Samaria. It's in Samaria, Samaria. Nablus, I've had a client, someone I sell stuff to, and he's always been inviting me in there, but I've never gone. I could go with him, but it's just I feel nervous now. Like, I've got a sales guy who's part Arabic. He used to go in, and he would go in, sit, have drink, have tea. He'd go past the security checkpoint, and they'd look at him and they'd know he was a Jew, but because of who he was with, they would know that he was okay to be where he was. But if it's a tension, what can happen is some kid can just know that he's a Jew and stab him, because you never quite under risk. So they play all sorts of games throughout that program with the language like that. They flip. And like, the other thing that happens all the way through it is when Doron, or when one of them is undercover, even when they're in Gaza and they're talking on the phone to the controllers, and I asked someone if this is true, and it is true. The controllers are speaking to them in Hebrew and they're answering in Arabic. And I'm like, why don't you just make it easy for them? You all speak Arabic. Just speak Arabic. Why give them the chance to start? But they're having bilingual conversations, which if you're really paying attention to the subtitles, you can see brackets around the Arabic, and it's like there's a code, but I cannot hear the Hebrew, and I'm thinking, like, he's undercover. He's like crawling around some house. Why are you talking to him in Hebrew?
So you said that it's popular. It's popular in the Palestinian Authority areas and across the Arab world. Is that right? But because is it okay? So obviously it gives away the Israeli security services secrets. That's partly appealing, presumably. But is it also because in an odd way, Fowler is quite sympathetic to, it's empathetic to the Muslims and the Arabs. It doesn't sort of, they're not just cartoonish baddies. It gets their mindset. It feels their pain, I think.
Yeah, one of the writers, Avi Issaroff, he writes for I don't know if he still does. He wrote for the Times of Israel for a while, and I would put him on a center left sort of political spectrum. And so he does have a tremendous amount of sympathy for the day-to-day cases. And like in the most recent series 3, there was a big, strong undercurrent of the fact that Doron kept doing stuff that just made a whole thing spiral out of control. And they were giving you the whole cycle of violence type argument. Sure. And I can't say, I don't like that because, I fundamentally see an issue of there is a reason why Israel and Jews have to be here. Once you detach yourselves from whether we should or shouldn't be allowed to have a Jewish state in Israel, then you can get into this cycle of violence nonsense for the rest of your life and not understand that look, that bad stuff happens. People with guns, if there are people with guns, then there are people who get killed. And sometimes it's justified, sometimes it isn't. But the fundamental nature is, I know that if we laid down all our weapons, we'd be slaughtered. If they laid down all their weapons, we'd have a shot at peace. And there is a fundamental truth. I keep giving this example, on Twitter constantly. You're committing genocide, the genocide of the Palestinian people. And you draw them a graph and you say there were 600 and 700,000 Palestinians in 1948, and there's 3 or 4 million today. Show me another genocide. Yeah. And it's like, the line I say is that Jews excel in almost all walks of life. I mean, we're off the charts in literature and Nobel Prizes and all of this stuff. We're crap at two things: professional golf. Find me a professional golfer who's won a serious major title, who's Jewish. It's very difficult. And committing genocide. We suck at that. I mean, we know, we've got more tanks than the British Army has horses. And don't even get me started on how many tanks the British Army has. I think we have 700 frontline Merkava tanks, 4 and 5. We have enough, and our tanks are the best in the world. They've got this trophy system. They're invulnerable. You can't shoot rockets at them, whatever. We can flatten Gaza in an instant. It's an afternoon's work. Why do we not do it? Because we're not genocidal. Because there's nothing in the Jewish makeup that would allow us to commit wanton wholesale slaughter. We just There might be a few aberrant individuals who will pick up a gun and go kill people, but they are aberrant, and they are, we treat them with the horror, and we really don't like them. Whereas on the other side, they venerate these people and give them pensions, which you pay for with your taxes.
Yes, that's very true. I can see why you'd find the lefty elements within Fowler annoying. At the same time, I think, as an outsider, with antennae which are quite carefully tuned to spotting any examples of kind of lefty selloutness and stuff, I think what Fowler captures very well is that thing of we love death like you love life. There's very much that dichotomy between the Israeli view of the world, where they're, when they, after an operation's over, they hang out with their mates, with their habibis. They have their beers and their cigarettes, and they go to clubs, and the clubs are Western. And yeah, I know, but I love spotting it every time the word appears in the script. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got this death cult. I mean, that's what it is. It's just
death.
Maybe the Palestinians don't want to go along with it, but it is.
I've had, again, when you sit down with actual real Arabs and Palestinian Arabs, if you can get them to a point where they're comfortable, and they don't like Islam, they're not fans of it, they won't say that, and they can't express that, and they'll eat on Ramadan, but only if they're very certain nobody's looking. That kind of thing. It's, when I was in England, the reason I'm called Brian of London is I started blogging back in the earliest days of blogging, soon after 9/11, and podcasting. And I did it under a pseudonym because I was saying stuff about Islam, and I was, hardcore into the counter jihad stuff. And funnily enough, coming to Israel, which has got many, many, many more Muslims around us than anywhere in England, even, 20% of Israel is Muslim, let alone the disputed territories. It managed to soften my views on the way people react with their Islam here. But Fowler didn't pull punches in that. In fact, I think the very first lines spoken in Arabic of the third series is Allahu Akbar, and then they're reciting Surah 1 in the mosque. And Surah 1 is, we curse those who've gone astray, and we curse those who've been led astray. And this is part of the daily. This is the most repeated prayer, cursing those who've gone astray. That's you. That's the Christians. Sorry, that's us. That's the Jews. Those who've been led astray are the dumb Christians who followed the Jews. It's like,
all right.
That's fundamental. And so I can't be too hard on people who have that drummed into them from 18 months. And that's the tough part of it. But I walked around, the one time I've walked around one of the refugee camps in Bethlehem, and that was when I went in there with Tommy. And we went in with a guide. My friend Kay set this up, but she did not go in because the security services watch over her, because something bad happened to her. They don't want anything else to happen to her. So her friend at the security services said, it's okay if your friends go in with this guide, but you're not allowed to go in. Don't go in. And she takes their advice very seriously. So we went in. Tommy was nervous as hell because he's thinking, it's like, I'm walking into the middle of a Palestinian refugee camp, but it's not a refugee camp with tents. It's just a bad neighborhood. The housing is packed tightly together. There's no playgrounds, and it's been kept that way as just a bargaining chip. It's horrible because this one was in Bethlehem, but there's another one in Nablus. I can drive to a hill. You look down on Nablus. There's this modern Arab town with nice apartments like you saw in Fouda. And then in the middle of it, there's this dirty old grey, horrible bit. And all around it are nice new apartment buildings. They've been living like that way for 40 years. It would be the work of 2 years to build a whole bunch of nice housing just to the side, go in there with bulldozers, knock it all down, and then build nice houses. And the money has been there. Billions have flowed in, but they don't do it. And so all through this refugee camp that we walk through, on every wall is a mural of another terrorist and another terrorist and another terrorist. The woman who killed everybody on the bus in Haifa, the one who took over the airplane. These people are literally on the walls. That's the Messi and the Beckhams. That's what these kids see as their hero. And how do you get out of that? And the worst part is they've been shoveling money at these people for this so long, and this is what you've got. It's a manufactured problem. I mean, Islam's not going away and jihad won't stop, but oh my God, it's been made so much worse by do-gooder lefties.
Brian, I've so enjoyed this conversation that I want to have another one with you. I did as well. Yeah.
Tell you in a few weeks. Yeah.
What you tell me now or later?
I'll tell you a little bit. I'll just tease it.
Give me the short version. So I've got to go and have my neck is completely buggered, and I've got to go. I've got an appointment. But you tell me this thing.
I'll tell you just the high level pitch. Friend of mine is a lawyer from Australia, and I'm helping him. And together, he and I are representing. We've got about 450 people so far. All people who held cryptocurrencies in 2018. And together we're suing Facebook, Google, and Twitter in Australia for about $300 billion because they banned the entire cryptocurrency industry from advertising. They did it all almost at the same time. And this is an illegal cartel in Australia. And we're going to sue them in Australia in a massive class action. And we're almost at the point of being able to file this thing. Yeah.
I had cryptos then. Does that mean that I'm eligible?
Yes, I'm going to send you the link after this. You can sign up, no win, no fee. You just put your name down, say how much you had. You can even do it anonymously, actually. And you will be in line for a little bit of the damages that we can manage to pull out of these guys.
So you mean the value of my cryptos was reduced as a result of this cartel?
Correct. Yeah, and there's other business losses. Businesses went out of business. Exchanges did far less business in 2018 following this ad ban. And then it got even worse because not only did Facebook actually led this. At the end of this January 2018, they put into their financial terms and conditions that cryptocurrencies are frequently associated with misleading and deceptive practices, and they banned all advertising related to cryptocurrencies. And then, in fact, they extended it and they kind of made it for anything related to blockchain. Meanwhile, at that same month, we later discovered, they formed an internal division of Facebook, which they called Libra. They staffed it up because we can see the profiles of the woman who went to head it. And she started work that month. And 18 months later, which is sort of middle of last year, they announced Libra. So they banned cryptocurrency advertising. And a year later, they come out with their own cryptocurrency proposal, which is not going to go anywhere. But we don't even need to prove to the Australian court that they did that deliberately, because it actually doesn't. They broke the law without that. But oh my God, does it look bad? And I'll tell you another one, just the last thing. Jack Dorsey of Twitter, he's not blameless. In January of 2018, Jack Dorsey was being very proud and tweeting about the fact that on Cash App, which is owned by Square, which is owned by him, you could buy Bitcoin. And he also banned advertising by most cryptocurrency companies on Twitter. So he's pushing it on his platform and banning it for everyone else. And this is a cartel. And America has got all the right laws for cartels for price fixing, but they don't have the right laws for restriction of supply of essential goods and services. And that's what Australia has. And Australia, you know the Australians, they're all about fairness. They hate unfair. You know, they're not cheats, except for some ball incidents. But the advantage we have in Australia is that Facebook, Google, and Twitter are hated there because all they've done is they've destroyed journalism in Australia, like they've destroyed it everywhere else. And they're just money collecting buckets. People pour money into Facebook, Google, and Twitter, and Facebook, Google, and Twitter ship it off to Ireland and other tax havens. So they've got no political cover in Australia. And they don't have hordes of in-house lawyers. They're going to have to hire lawyers. And we're going to sue. And that's...
Oh, well done.
File soon. And so when we file, that's when I'll come back and tell you more.
Okay, that's great. Brian, it's been lovely having you on the podcast. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you for real in Israel. Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for confirming that I am very similar to Daron, apart from mine, maybe a little skinnier.
You're skinnier, yeah. You might even run better than him. You always looked a bit fat.
I don't think I box better, and I'm not as good at killing people with my bare hands. No, I'm not. That's the other thing I want to do. I want to do how do you pronounce it? Krav Maga. I want to do Krav Maga. Yeah.
Actually, there's a great place that will teach you to shoot as well. Just give you the feeling of what it is. I went on a shooting course one time and I had this big German guy screaming at me while that was the exercise. It was like things were popping up and he was screaming in my ear. Yeah, that whole stress.
That's what I want. Yeah, I want women holding babies, and I want to see whether I kill them or not.
That's exactly. Yeah. I've got the plan.
Yeah. Good. May I remind my lovely special listening friends all around the world that freedom isn't free, and you can sponsor me on Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can get early access to all my brilliant podcasts like this one. You can obviously help fund Dick and James Go to Israel, and and you get my spectator column, and you get to hang out with a community of like-minded folk. So it's a really good deal. So think about that, and thank you again to Brian of London, and bye everybody. Bye.